Hello watch enthusiasts. Now it's been a year since my last video on the best value pilot's watches, and so as a result I feel I'd like to reproduce this video whilst taking into account modern pricing details and the change in relative value of different watches, to give you all a better idea, I suppose, of this type of watch in the present time, where price increases from a lot of brands and also new releases from others have really changed the market quite considerably and given us some really tremendous options. In this video I would also like to take into account different watches from different types of pilot background, I suppose. Watches which are designed to be tool-esque and military, as well as those designed to pick up on the romantic charm of yesterday's aviation. However, before I begin this video, I would like to invite you all to join me on the social media platform Snups at The Watch Guys, a group set up specifically for you, my viewers, to discuss matters of horology with myself and with other enthusiasts, as well as giving you the ability to ask me any questions and suggest video themes or topics. Therefore, I really do feel this will allow you a greater role to play in the production of my videos, and will hopefully enhance the viewer experience for you. And it certainly has been great to see so many of you contributing to the group with pictures of your watches, your collections, and indeed questions for other enthusiasts and myself. And I think this really does lend to a splendid community of watch lovers, so I really would encourage you to join. Now the first watch I'd like to talk about is the Marathon Military Navigator. And I've spoken about this watch before in a video on the toughest watches in the world. And this is a watch which I think really does hold its own in its price point of £190 to £215, and that's because now there's a date version as well as a no-date model, which means that you can now choose between a cleaner dial layout or indeed a date model with the date displaced to the 4:30 position. And this is a watch which is very different to anything else really on the market, especially at this price point, because it has what seems to be a plastic case, and in fact this is a high-resistance resin, which is very resistant to bumps and nicks, and is extremely light as well, which is perfect to have on the wrist then. And this is really as close to a pure military device as you can get, with its Hesselite crystal, which gives an easily repolished front to the watch, as well as a nice and shock-resistant crystal. This is also shown by the fact that this watch, though only water-resistant to 60 metres, which is enough really for a pilot's watch, it does have a negative pressure-resistant crystal, and that's to say that if you were to be removed from a pressurised environment, say ejecting from an aircraft, the crystal wouldn't pop out as a result of a higher pressure being inside the watch, allowing the watch to work and function once you hit the ground, which is something I suppose you would want in that kind of emergency situation. Now the dimensions of this watch are contemporary, instead of being smaller like vintage watches, but they are functional and practical for both big and small wrists, because the watch is 41mm in diameter and 48mm lug to lug, which really is a very, very comfortable size. It's the same size as my Seiko 5, which I always use as a demonstration of a watch which fits everyone. Its dimensions are perfect, really, and this shares those dimensions, which really do suit the vast majority of wrists. Similarly, this watch does have an asymmetrical case design, which means that the right-hand side of the case protects the crown, which is really imperative in a watch like this. And actually, I do think that these asymmetrical cases do a better job of protecting the crown, for the simple reason that if a blow strikes the side of the watch, it'll most likely skim off, or it'll be a glancing blow rather than a blow which will catch on a separate crown guard and quite possibly damage that. So actually I think this is a very, very clever design for producing a watch which is very, very versatile in terms of the conditions it can survive. Now in terms of features which are very impressive for this price point, one of which is the luminescence on this watch. On that very clear and legible military dial we have tritium illumination. These are tritium tube, and that's hydrogen-3, which is an isotope of hydrogen, which allows the watch to glow in the dark because it's a beta particle emitter. And these will glow for about 25 years, but their half-life is 12.5 years, so the watch will remain illuminated for a fair while, and you can always have the hands and dial changed after that time, which is something which Marathon should be able to provide with their servicing of this watch. Also, the movement of this watch is remarkably high quality, especially for this price point, considering it is a Swiss quartz movement. And frankly, I think a quartz movement is what you would want, especially in a watch of this price point, because it means you have a very, very resistant movement which won't be damaged by a sharp shock or bang, as well as the fact that this watch is designed to be used in the cockpit, as shown by that bezel, which is bidirectional and allows you to both use it as a timing bezel, as well as a rudimentary GMT bezel if you're crossing time zones, which I think all add together to make a watch which really is superb in terms of being a functional and practical military pilot's watch for someone who doesn't want to spend a fortune on their timepiece, but wants something with a real heritage and history and a real military background. Now, the second watch I'd like to talk about is a model from Stowa, and this is the Klassik Ikarus 40mm. And this is a timepiece which impresses me quite a lot, because it comes from a brand with a real heritage, and Stowa are known for the quality of their watches, but also for the fact they used to produce pilot watches in the 1930s and 40s under the Flieger specification in Germany. And so as a result they have a great deal of heritage behind them in terms of this particularly iconic style of pilot's watch. But the model we're looking at today is rather different to their normal style because it takes a spin off the usual black dial loomed watches with blued hands, and produces a watch which I think for a lot of people will be a little bit more wearable and more versatile because it doesn't have quite such a cold technical aesthetic. Now, the dimensions of the 40mm Klassik are the same as the other Stowa models in this Klassik lineup, except the dial here has been executed very, very differently, with a date placement at 6 o'clock, leading to a wonderfully symmetrical dial layout. Similarly, we have painted indices in that traditional style, but these have been outlined in black to make them stand out in a more bold way and give this watch an altogether slightly more 1950s look to it, rather than the 40s design this watch originally was. Also, this dial has been changed in terms of colour to show a metallic silver, which is quite a rare colour to come across in a non-sunburst configuration, and makes this watch look very technical while still looking remarkably attractive, and does bring back the image of the sides of those polished steel or aluminium 1950s aircraft, which really does stand out beautifully on the wrist. Now, the case of this watch is very traditional in its styling, with a simple brushed finish and that wonderful onion crown on it. And this watch is water resistant to 50 metres, which is perfectly reasonable really for a pilot's watch of this type, but really it's in the customisation that the Stowa really do set themselves apart. And that's because you can choose a great deal of options over the standard list price of £600. So with this watch you can choose the hands, so for an extra €50 you can have blued steel hands rather than the blackened ones, and equally you can also choose a different movement. So for instance you can have a regulated and beautifully decorated ETA 2824 for an extra £130 over the base model, and then for £150 you can get a fully decorated manually wound ETA 2804 as well, to give the watch a more classic air, and also a great view through that beautiful sapphire exhibition caseback. And this really is typical of Stowa's way of doing business, where you have a watch which truly can be customised to your specification if you contact them and have a chat with them. Now, lead times can be quite long, but you really are getting a product which is designed and finished to your specification, which really is a wonderful thing and a rare thing, especially these days, when a great deal of brands tend to make watches in more of a production line style. My only reservation with this watch is the name, because of course Ikarus was the son of the designer of the Labyrinth and escaped from Crete using wings made of or attached together with wax, and who quite famously flew too close to the sun. The wax melted and fell into the sea, which does seem like a rather ominous name for a pilot's watch, but nonetheless it's a beautiful timepiece, wonderfully made, and extremely well priced considering the versatility and the exclusivity of this timepiece. Now, the third watch in this list is also a Flieger-inspired style of timepiece, and this is the Sinn 856 UTC. And this is a watch which is very close to that specification of large dial, relatively comfortable and compact lugs on the watch, as well as a very easily legible dial, which does take inspiration from the same base, I suppose, as the Flieger. But it isn't surprising when one considers that Sinn's founder, Helmut Sinn, was a blind flying instructor, so one would need a watch that was accurate and extremely legible to judge distances when one used your time and your speed to establish those distances one covered in an aircraft, because of course it was incredibly important to be very accurate with one's readings, otherwise a large disparity between the perceived distance and the actual distance could build up. Now, this Sinn really does present an incredible level of features and technology for its price of £1,450. And this watch, if we start with the case, features a 44mm case with very short lug-to-lug distances of only 47mm, which makes the watch extremely wearable, despite the fact that it does have quite large diameter. Also, the crown is very nicely protected and nice and large, so it can easily be manipulated with hands in a quick and easy way due to the way it's geared, because one has a larger crown. One's able to move the hands much more quickly to change time zones, which is something one notices with a lot of large crown pilot's watches. Also, the watch's dial is really fantastically legible, with those very, very clear numerals in the 4 quadrants of the dial, and then fully loomed hands, as well as a fully loomed dial, which really does give a spectacular level of legibility at night, as well as the fact that the UTC hand on that smaller 24-hour scale on the inside of the dial is a different colour, so one doesn't mistake it for either of the other hands, whilst the date is also tucked away at 4 o'clock. And being a professional pilot's watch, this does have features such as the tegumented case, which make it much, much more resilient to bumps and scratches, because this tegumenting process that Sinn uses on their cases makes them about four times more hard in terms of their surface hardness than a normal steel case, which makes this watch extremely difficult to damage, especially when it's going to be bumped around a cockpit. And also, this watch is anti-magnetic to 1000 Gauss, which makes it perfectly suited to use around a lot of electrical machinery, in a cockpit, for instance, when there are various detectors and so on working, which would normally have an effect on the timekeeping of a watch, which of course really can't be the case in a watch that one's relying on to navigate. The watch also features Sinn's AR dehumidifying technology, whereby one has a case which is fully filled with argon to prevent the oxygen inside the case from reacting with the oils, as well as the moisture in the case from reacting with the oils. And the moisture is controlled by a copper sulfate capsule, which is placed into the side of the case, which absorbs the moisture inside the watch and changes colour, as students of chemistry will know, from white to blue as it becomes hydrated. And so as a result, one can tell through the little sapphire crystal in the side of it how far through this process it is and when you have to have it changed in service. Of course, the case itself is also 200 metres water resistant, which does give one a great deal of confidence, and one really can swim with this watch, and technically speaking, one could even go snorkeling or scuba diving with it, though of course it's not really a watch for these purposes. But that said, though, even when one's not flying an aeroplane, that UTC hand can have a real benefit if one's travelling a great deal and wants to keep a home time, as well as if one wants to use it to judge which way the north is, using the watch as a compass by lining up the hour hand with the sun, and then the direction of the UTC hand should, depending on which hemisphere you're in, point to north or south. As a result, I do think this watch is really a perfect technical pilot's watch for those who enjoy a technologically advanced piece with features that one would not be able to find from other brands. And it does have a very respectable movement, the ETA 2893 as well, which should be easily serviced by Sinn at a reasonable price as well, which does add to the attraction of such a timepiece. Now, the penultimate watch in this video is a newcomer to the watch world from a brand which I must say I've grown to respect a great deal, and that's Christopher Ward. And this is their first sort of professional in-house pilot's watch, if you will, and I've been extremely impressed by this piece. And this is the Christopher Ward C8 Power Reserve, and it's a pilot's watch with a fairly modern aesthetic, but whilst drawing on the usual characteristics of a pilot's watch. But it's really in the movement that Christopher Ward have been able to produce a watch which is great value here, because it's a 44mm watch, but inside it houses a movement which certainly justifies the large case, with a 5-day power reserve and a beautiful exhibition caseback. Now, this watch is available in 2 colours, either in a simple brushed stainless steel with those beautiful bevels down the case and that wonderful turbine-style signed crown, or you can get the same watch but in a DLC PVD black finish, which is also brilliant, although I must say I personally wouldn't go for the black DLC version as a pilot's watch, simply because a pilot's watch has to have some degree of resistance in terms of bumps and so on. And the issue with the DLC or PVD finish is that it's very, very easy to bump the surface of it and end up knocking the surface layer off, thus making quite visible scratches in the coating, which can't be repaired unless you have the whole watch recoated, which will cost a fortune. So, as a result, I personally would advocate the simple steel case version, and really focus on the other features, especially since it comes at a slight discount over the PVD model. But this watch is really for someone who enjoys complications and interesting movements and designs, which you wouldn't be able to find elsewhere. Because on the dial of this watch you can see that it has a clearly legible dial with a lot of luminescent material on the hands and also the indices in both a sandwich style dial, with the luminescent indices being placed beneath the dial and having cutouts, as well as large applied sections at 12, 6 and 9, as well as 3 o'clock, to further give an aesthetic which really does scream quality in this case. As you can see, the dial also houses a couple of complications. Firstly, you have the date, which has this wonderful fuel gauge style of opening, with a 3 date opening with a white background with this cut-out date wheel, which means that you can only really clearly see the central date aperture with its white background, which shows the numeral, which I think is a very clever idea and does give a wonderful aviation vibe to this watch. Also, you have the power reserve indicator on the left-hand side of the dial at 9 o'clock, with 5 days power reserve, which really is a brilliant feature to have on a manually wound watch like this, because especially those who enjoy an accurate watch, it's best to keep the watch in the central section of its power reserve for optimal accuracy. And while I'm talking about that, this watch is also a cost chronometer, which is again a very impressive feature for a watch of this price, which in this case is £1,645. Also, you have the sub-seconds at 6 o'clock, which further add to the decluttering of the centre of the dial, and I think make this watch quite a balanced piece to look at. On the case back, you see the pièce de résistance of this watch, with an incredible movement with those DLC or PVD finished bridges, with those 2 spring barrels as well, which again add to this watch's 5-day power reserve, which is a very impressive feature. Additionally, you can see various other workings, and it's very clear this movement is completely in-house, and so as a result is quite an impressive piece for this price point, and is pretty much unheard of, because though brands like Nomos make in-house movements, the watches they make with in-house movements around this price point don't have the number of complications that Christopher Ward have been able to fit here. And though I think Nomos have created incredible watches, in terms of this sports watch, Christopher Ward really have created a spectacular timepiece, especially when one considers their 5-year warranty, and also the fact that they have some of the best customer service in the business, making this watch an extremely attractive piece for someone considering a pilot's watch, with a classical style, but with a really tremendous movement at its core. Now, the watches I'd like to talk about to end this video are from Hanhart, and they are the Pioneer Mark II and the Pioneer Tachytele. And the reason why I'd like to talk about 2 watches here is because they have the same case, same movement, and generally identical specifications apart from the dial, which is slightly more heavily functional, I suppose, on the Tachytele, but I'll talk about that in a moment. And Hanhart are a brand that I have the utmost respect for because they produce beautifully made watches, which pay homage to their past, and are generally beautifully made chronographs. Though they do have a couple of 3-handers, generally they specify and they specialise in watches with chronographs. And they really do have a way which doesn't really look like anything else on the market. And these particular watches pay homage to watches made in the very late 1930s by the brand. And they have these beautiful 40mm cases with 49mm lug-to-lug distances, which are relatively flat, but due to their short distance means they will fit small wrists as they will large ones, which is a major question I get asked quite a lot about watches. And they actually feature quite a lot, because they feature a beautiful brushed case with this very traditional style of shaping, which is in fact the most true to the original watches in their collection, with those sharp cut-off lugs, and that large crown and asymmetrical design for the pushers. And the idea was that it would be easier to stop and start the chronograph if the pusher was moved slightly north of its normal position at 2 o'clock and closer into the lug, which requires quite a bit of modification to the movement in terms of levering the usual pusher system up to that position. Now, while still talking about this beautiful brushed case, you have wonderful polished details like that bezel, which is a really beautiful addition to the watch, with this fluted aspect to it, but a curved fluting, which is very reminiscent of 1930s watches, which this watch, of course, pays homage to. And additionally, this acts as a bidirectional bezel, with that ceramic red marker at the 12 o'clock position, which can be moved around to measure the tracking of time, I suppose, as well as the fact that this allows you to time something else if, say, you're already using the chronograph, and you want to keep a rough idea of how long another measurement is taking, you can use this. And of course, there are lots of other details, such as that large 8mm crown, which is a beautiful piece to behold, as well as the fact that this crown does allow the watch to be water resistant to 100 metres, which is a very reasonable amount for a watch of this type. Now, the pushers are also very beautifully made, with the top pusher, as I've said, being displaced upwards to be easier to press with gloves, as well as the bottom pusher being capped in red ceramic. And the story behind this is rather interesting, because this was allegedly put down to a military pilot's girlfriend in order to prevent him from pressing the wrong pusher in the heat of action. In fact, painted the bottom pusher, or rather the one of the pushers of his chronograph, his Hanhart chronograph, with her nail varnish in red, which gave this particular look, which has stuck really with the Hanhart models. and this is carried over to that bezel ceramic section, as well as all the chronograph functions on the dial, which allows you a nice division between the red chronograph functions and the white timekeeping, meaning that you'll never make a mistake between the two. And the dial on these two watches that you've now seen on the screen, as you can see, have two very different styles. You have the base style that's seen on the Mark II, with that very simple dial with the hours, the minutes, and the chronograph function, as well as those beautifully sunk sub-dials with that wonderful texturing, which does divide the dial and give you a much more luxurious model than you would otherwise see. And then you have the Tachytele with that wonderful tachymeter and telemeter in that spiral layout in the centre of the dial, which is very typical of these early watches and early chronographs, as seen on a great deal of vintage timepieces too, which do add a degree of function to this otherwise very simple timepiece. Now, the movement inside this watch is a modified Veltro 7753, which is decorated with a specially designed rotor, as well as full decoration on the plates and so on. Though sadly you can't see it as there's no exhibition case back, I certainly trust Hanhart to make a beautiful movement for this timepiece, especially when one considers the fact that a great deal of watches around this price point go for the vertical layout of a Veltro 7750, rather than what I find more attractive, the Bicompact's horizontal layout seen on this watch. Anyway, that concludes this video on the best value pilots watches for 2017. And it's true that the watches in this video do differ very greatly in terms of what they offer, where the Hanhart couldn't be more different really to the Marathon, but both I think have a place, as they do both offer a great deal for the amount of money one pays. So thank you very much for watching, and please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to enjoy more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is I'm the Watch Guy, over and out.